Get ready for the ECIS Leadership Conference between the 27th and 29th of April at the International School of Dusseldorf. Our focus is on culture and change, and we are delighted to get the conversation started with Simon O'Connor and Gill Eaton.
Hello and welcome to the latest of our discussions looking at school culture. My name's Simon O'Connor. I'm the director of DERA International School here in Dubai, and I'm also the Chief Education Officer for the Al Futtaim Education Foundation. Some of you may have seen the videos that we've put out already, and this is very much leading up to the ECIS conference looking at leadership and culture. And so this is very much the last one that we're going to be doing, but building on those previous recordings that have taken place. I'm delighted to be joined today by two friends and colleagues, and I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves first of all. So first of all, I'd like to introduce Gill. Over to you.
Good morning, Simon. Yes, I'm Gill Eaton, the head of Rivers International School, a very small school in Arnhem in the Netherlands. I've been working here for many years, and we've made a connection, haven't we, because of our, we both are intrigued by culture and in schools. So I'm really looking forward to having this conversation today, because I'm sure we're going to cover a few areas that we both are passionate about.
I'm absolutely sure of that. Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Gill. And Helen.
Yeah, good morning, Gill and Simon. It's great to be here. My name's Helen Morgan, and I've just taken up a new post with ECIS as Head of International Consultancy. And I think for me, you know, again, culture is of real interest in terms of school development, school improvement, but also, I suppose, with my coaching hat on as well, it really interests me too. So delighted to be here with you both.
Thank you, Helen. Thank you, Gill.
You.
So, as we've done in the past, we've actually asked Helen to moderate this discussion and just to give us a couple of prompts. So, I'm going to hand over to you, Helen, to start us off.
Yeah, I think for me, obviously, we've got the ECIS Leadership Conference coming up on the 27th to the 29th of April. And I suppose the first question from me is, what are you both looking forward to with regard to the conference, because the big focus is on culture and change? So maybe Gill, start us off.
Okay, thank you. Yes, no, I'm very much looking forward to the conference. And when I first saw the title, I thought yes, great, because it needs to be definitely raised. The awareness needs to be raised about the importance of culture in school. I mean, every school, of course, has a culture, but it's very intriguing to find out how does everybody know what the culture is in their schools. And what I'm looking forward to most is connecting with other leaders and just having those conversations about, well, what does it look like in your school? And are you aware of it? And are you able to influence it? And are you all busy with it on a daily basis? And just understanding a little bit more about how it's working.
Yeah, I think, you know, that opportunity to talk to other leaders is invaluable. What about you, Simon? Because is this your first ECIS conference?
Yeah, it is. It is. And actually, I mean, I can think of a number of factors that I'm looking forward to. I think so. I work in a British international school, and I belong to a number of different organisations for British international schools. But one of the real attractions for ECIS was that it goes beyond British international schools. So it'll be really fascinating for me to meet leaders from beyond that particular sector. But to echo what Gill said, I think both of our work on culture has been somewhat in isolation, and I'm sure we're going to come on to this.
Absolutely.
But it really isn't something that goes across school development and school understanding. We both think that it should, but actually the real opportunity for me is to take my work, my understanding, the research that I've been doing, which has been relatively in isolation, but to share and contrast it in discussion with colleagues from elsewhere. And as with any conference, I'm really looking forward to the talks, to the speeches, to the presentations, but I think also it's the networking opportunities to have those discussions beyond the actual formal elements of a conference. It will be really interesting to see who's doing what, the advantages, but also the pitfalls that they've encountered. So yeah, very much looking forward to it.
Yeah, it's what happens in the small moments that often really matters, isn't it?
Yeah, 100%.
I suppose for me, kind of what interests me is what led you both to culture in your schools and that level of focus. I don't know who wants to start.
Jill, you go for it.
I can start. Yeah. No, I think we had this conversation before, Simon, that we sort of happened upon it by accident. I think we've been bringing things in and calling them certain things, but what we've now I think consolidated everything is into our Rivers Way. So our school is Rivers International School, and by calling it the Rivers Way, it's given us something. And I think we realized that, oh yes, that's what the culture is, but we've quite liked the term because it felt like it was something that belonged to us. And the Rivers Way encompasses the way we do things here. It's the curriculum, the pedagogies, the behaviors, the beliefs, the values, but it's our way. And it's also a feeling, and it's something that we all feel. Every member of staff feels it. And we're like constantly reflecting on, oh yes, I felt that. I felt whenever there's a new initiative or something that's happening in the school, oh yeah, that's the Rivers Way. And I think that Rivers Way is also making others curious, like, what is your way? And it's not something that can be like taken and put somewhere else, because it has become our way. And in our area of schools, the interest in when you call something a way, and not all our culture is this, became a little bit more of a focus for other people to ask questions. And with those questions, we are then reflecting on, well, actually, what is it, and how can we influence it and develop it to something really powerful and strong in our school?
What's similar and what's different for you, Simon, when you listen to that?
There's a lot of similarities, and actually the first one is the kind of accidental way in which we really sort of, again, to echo what Jill said, stumbled across looking at organisational culture in school. My context was that I started here at Deer International School just under 3 years ago, which was obviously in the midst of the pandemic, but it was also off the back of my leadership of another school in Dubai, Jumeirah College, where I'd been for 7 years. And I think I was very conscious of the fact that there's it's well known that often successful head teachers or principals in their first school go on to fail in their second school, because they take everything that they've done in their first school and try and impose it in a different context, and not surprisingly, it doesn't work as well. So I was trying to think about, I was mindful of that. Jumeirah College was and continues to be a hugely successful school, but I think the one thing that I was frustrated by when I left was the bit that I hadn't done. Was we'd done assessment, we'd done teaching and learning, we'd done organizational efficiency, we'd done all the bits, but I never felt we tied it together as well as we could. You then come into a school in the middle of a pandemic. You've got a huge focus, as all school leaders across the world did, having to look at well-being, having to look at supporting staff. And from that emerged a discussion, really by accident, by osmosis, whatever you wish to call it, looking at the overall culture. And that's what triggered it. I then started sort of looking into this in quite a lot more detail. And for me, the real kind of turning point was the understanding that 40, 50 years ago, the corporate world started looking at this in real earnest. If you were to ask the leader of any global company, I don't know, Apple, Toyota, whatever you wish to call it, and say, are you looking significantly at organizational culture? I think you'd probably get something of a bemused look, which with the answer, well, of course we are. All of the corporate world looks very strongly at the organizational culture that they have. But schools don't. And there's a variety of reasons why schools don't. One of which is, I think quite rightly, schools try and distance themselves from the corporate world. We're not corporate is a phrase we hear quite a lot. And there's good reason for that. But I think there's a danger that you lose the good stuff by disregarding everything. The second thing is, and those people that have seen this before will know that this subject is a real fascination of mine. But if you go through leadership training for school leaders, it is barely mentioned. You've got an awful lot looking at how to construct a business case, how to talk to governors. And I'm not for a minute disputing the importance of those factors. But I think Jill and I and Helen as well would all agree that a focus, and I'll go as far as saying an unremitting focus on organisational culture, is so powerful and such a tool for school improvement. So yeah, that's how I came across it. In terms of other similarities, the work that we've done here has emerged not into the Rivers Way, but into the DIS Way, and we've identified a series of things that behaviours that attach to our values. We can go into that in more detail, but yeah, huge amount of similarities. But the first one is the accidental stumbling across organisational culture that prompted this journey that we've been on.
I think it's just really interesting to hear that journey, because it is often with culture and evolution, but I think when I was listening to you talk about leadership training, often it tends to be very transactional, doesn't it? You know, this is how you run a governors meeting, these are the things you need to think about. But actually, when we think about culture, we begin to move into that transformational space. And I suppose that's the bit that becomes really interesting as a school leader, maybe, Jill?
Yes, it definitely does. So I think like you talk about the journey, Helen, and these things don't happen overnight. It's something that develops over time. You want everybody on the same page and all believing in the focus and moving in the same direction. That doesn't just happen. That has to be influenced by the way that we conduct ourselves, our behaviors. A lot of it is in the very small details, and I keep coming back to that. It's the little things that sometimes can make the changes. The feeling we had, what is a Rivers learner, what is a Rivers teacher, constantly having those conversations and coming back to the idea of conversations, that seemed to be the driving force, not just conversations changing, but the actual using conversations for possibilities and for school improvement, and giving opportunities as often as we can for the professionals in the staff and community to have conversations. And I just want to highlight an example we had in a staff meeting this week. We like to start our staff meetings with a little question, just an open question that you can find someone that you don't normally have the opportunity to talk to. You have a question, and then that forms a little conversation. And yes, yeah, last time I had the conversation, it was what is your favorite sound? It's just a random question to get a conversation going. And then I found out that one of our student teachers plays the cello. And this was something I didn't know about her before, but we immediately made a connection and we had a conversation, and it was something I didn't know about her before, and she was proud to tell me. And then another question was, what is your, what's a strange food that you've ever tried? And it led to conversations about countries visited. And what we didn't realize at the time was how powerful those little moments were. So then now we've built that in, and we've built a learning moment into all the beginning of all the meetings, because it brings everyone together, and then it sets the sort of tone for the rest of the meeting. So those are the small things. And the way you're connecting and the bonding and the trust is built, then you've got your whole story about psychological safety, and that's really important these days, and how we're addressing that with the staff too. But they all really matter, and everyone's really appreciating that's especially in the background of the pandemic, of how that is absolutely essential to our staff well-being and the purpose of the school.
Yeah, again, it's, you look at it and you think safety, belonging, connection, trust. They're all of those things that often, are tacit. Sometimes they're not visible, but when you become intentional and when you become deliberate about them, suddenly you start to really strengthen those bonds and that feeling of connection with people. Simon, I don't know if you want to come in here.
Yeah,
what are you thinking?
Lots of reflections. I mean, I would agree with everything that you've said. The only thing I would add to it is actually, I think you need to go a step back. And we've used Simon Sinek's work a lot. And for those that don't know, Simon Sinek is someone that talks about the corporate world, behaviors in the corporate world. And one of his books is Start With Why. And actually, the first thing we did is to establish what, and I think a lot of schools think it's a given. What do we do in school? Well, it's school, isn't it? We educate for good, and there's no one questioning the validity of what we do. But actually, I think it's really important to have that conversation, because everything that springs off that then becomes why we're doing this. This is why it's important, and people have a greater understanding. Another great book is Leaders Eat Last, and that talks about leadership behaviors. But in reference to that, Helen, you were talking about the distinction between transactional and transformational. Again, that's formed a really important, I think, turning point in the leadership's understanding of culture here, and I absolutely include myself in this. I think all school leaders get frustrated, but I get frustrated on occasions when staff behave in a very transactional way, and they're asking, well, why would I do that? And you want to say, well, because it's for the good of the kids, but it's the realization that in the same way that when you're a teacher, you model behaviors that you want students to endorse. If we as leaders are behaving in a transactional way, how on earth can we expect staff to do anything other than to pick up what we're modeling? And it was a real conversation, and it was a really, as I say, it was a really development point for me to understand. If we don't want staff to behave transactionally, we've got to stop behaving transactionally as leaders as well. I wouldn't claim we're experts at this or even good at this, but we are trying to do that, and the impact of that has been significant. I'm not going to go into details, but we are trying really hard to not be transactional, to not say, if then, which is the basis of any transaction, but just to discuss this based on the values that we have at the school. And if people get that message, we've discovered that actually really quickly and really significantly, the behaviors then change. If you look at the understanding of culture, which I carry with me, is the sort of values, norms, beliefs that an individual holds in common with other members of the group. If you identify the values and relate things back to those, the behaviors then change. So 100% absolutely agree with that, and everything that you've said but it's coming back to that foundation of what the culture is. And I think a really important discussion to have in schools is, what culture do you want?
Yes.
Gill schools in Holland, mine's in the United Arab Emirates. We serve completely different communities, and I think this is a really important second point, which is that every culture has to be contextually right.
Yes.
You look at Dubai. Dubai is a hugely diverse international melting pot of different nationalities. There is no way that if I took the culture here and tried to impose it in Gill's school, it should be right. But how often does that conversation take place? When do leaders actually sit down and say, this is our context, okay, and as a consequence of this context, this is the culture we want? And actually, we have had that conversation, and I cannot overemphasize the power that there's been from it. Sorry, I went off on a sidetrack.
I think that, again, it is that whole conversation piece, because I think for me, kind of when we start to think about transactional to transformational, it is about asking yourselves as leaders in a school about, how often do we actually talk about culture and say, how well are we doing? How do we know? And then fundamentally the humility question of how do we make that better and involve others in the conversation as well. And I think once, like Gill said, you start to kind of get everybody involved in that conversation, and you build those connections and you build that sense of purpose with why, that's when you can really get things moving, because you almost kind of cut to the heart of what it is that matters, and that can be really hard to prioritize in a school. But when you come down to what is it that matters and why are we doing things, it just becomes considerably easier, perhaps.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I agree. And actually, a conversation we were having before we started the recording is that there's two perspectives on this that I personally hold. The first is the power of a recognition and understanding of culture. And I just re-emphasize the point I just made. I don't think anyone can say to another school, this should be your culture. But I think the message that Gill and I certainly agree with is that an awareness of culture can be so powerful. We're both at a relatively early stage of our understanding of this, but I think we've both recognized the impact that this can make. But the other side is, and this is why I was surprised actually now with the lack of conversation about this in the education industry, is that we have all, and I'm sure anyone watching this, has been into a school where there has been a broken culture, where things haven't been working. Toxic cultures, fragmented, balkanized. You can choose your own terminology to fit. Now, I fundamentally believe that no school leader goes into a school determined to put a culture that's wrong into their school. That then prompts the question, if this is happening and we know it does happen, why? So I think there's two elements to this. Firstly, the huge impact that a focus on organizational culture can make in a school, but also the danger of not being aware of it. And if you take your eye off the ball, the potential hazards that can result as a consequence.
Absolutely.
I don't know what you think, Gill.
Yes, no, I think it's important to, obviously, you can intentionally influence your culture. We've had meetings on psychological safety and shown some Amy Edmondson little video clips, so everybody's aware that that's something that's really we value that. We value the that everybody can say something without fear of repercussion. Everyone can has a voice, and that's we have many moments in the day or put into our systems and structures where there's opportunities for that. But I think I agree, Simon, you have to stay alert to protect the integrity of your culture as well, because there are so many variables and there's so many risk mistakes that if you have a hunch that something isn't going well, it can very quickly spiral the wrong way. And I think those are the times where you need to be present, you need to be aware, you need to be listening in, because you have your culture and you're developing it. It's going, you know, you feel, oh wow, I feel really comfortable here, but it's not a given, and it doesn't, it's the, you know, you can embed it and you can sustain it, but you still always need to be alert to things because there's constant changes and we're all bringing in new initiatives. There's lots more. We're looking at formative assessment now. It's not, you know, it's not a given that everybody's going to welcome it with open arms, and we have to, you know, but we you know, feel as a school this is the best approach for education, and you know, the majority you have to commit even if you don't agree to some things, and it's not always easy. So by giving people the opportunity to have those like sometimes conflict conversations, but in a trusting environment, that brings success as well. But it's a point. So like, you can't put one culture, you have to grow it and nurture it in your own school. It's always there. Where if you go to a new school, there is a culture, find it, and then also yes, keep going with it, but make sure, you know, you are constantly busy with it, because it's not something that just be parked in a nice folder and this is our culture.
Yeah.
In the background. Be intentional with your parents, with the children, and talk about that it's important to us.
I think that a step even beyond that as well. Anyone who's watching this works in the school. That school has a culture. Guarantee it, 100%. The question for me is, before you even get on to influencing it, do you even know what that culture is? Mm-hmm. And actually, I'd go even further. It has lots of cultures. But if the school leaders are not influencing this, then who is? It could well be the parents. It could well be the students. It could well be the governors. And I'm not saying any of that is wrong. But I think what we're all saying is that this culture exists in that school. And I think we probably both agree as well, all three of us agree, you can't direct this. You can. It is so complex. It's so nuanced. There's so many different factors that go into it. But the two steps for me are, three steps is, number one, are you aware? Number two, have you even had a discussion about what kind of culture you would like there to be? And if that's the case, what steps can you take to influence it? None of us can say, you know, some schools might want to go down a strictly selective academic route. Who am I to say that's wrong? Some might want to go down an inclusive, holistic sense. Who am I to say that's wrong? But just that awareness and that conversation, I think, is so important and so impactful. And the dangers of not doing it are manifest as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with that. And I think, again, it's interesting, isn't it, about those conversations that do and don't take place. And I think, you know, listening to both of you, you both got the conversation started in your own schools. I think there's a huge recognition that you know, that it's a journey. Oh, yeah. And, you know, you've got to keep paying attention to the road as you're on the journey, so to speak. But you've also got to know where you're going with it. And if you don't, then again, that's challenging and problematic.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's true.
It's the power of it, and it is considerable. Yeah.
I think, Helen, I remember once we had a conversation before, and you don't want to go into a school and play guess the culture game. So it brings us back, and I think we all share this idea that it really needs to be visible and tangible. And it may not be in like, you know, very like you're putting things up or displays or anything, but just in little tiny things that you notice, like when you go into a new school, you know where to go, you know to hang your coat, you know where the coffee machine is, you're welcomed in a nice, pleasant way. And just, it's like I say, it's all in the details sometimes, because those things will make you feel comfortable in that environment. You'll start feeling the culture, and that's what people will notice. And I think if all the children feel that, the staff, the parents, you feel this sense of belonging, and you feel at ease, and you feel very warm. And that caring side, a caring culture, is so essential, especially in international schools where families are just landing. You know, as I'm sure you have that in Dubai as well. Everything is very, very different. And it can go a long way to just have a culture which they can feel part of when they arrive in the school.
it's even, I visit lots of different schools. I think one of the things that really interests me is you get a sense of the culture, um, even from the signage as you enter the school.
Yep.
And when you go into reception, again, you know, what kind of welcome do you get as you kind of go into the school? And for me, that's always interesting, because I think what you meet at reception is often a really good starting point for what you'll get for the rest of the day.
There's another thing that I often listen to quite heavily, which is, I'm sure in the same Gill school, you know, we will tour prospective parents. And I'll admit, I very rarely do that tour. We've got a registration team that do it, but I quite often meet parents at the end of that tour. And the obvious question, how was it? Very rarely will parents report back on what they saw. Very rarely will parents report back on what they heard. Nearly every single time, they will talk about how it felt. And that's the culture, isn't it? You know, it feels X, it felt Y. We'd be happy to send our son or daughter here because it felt, or we can see them. So they're reflecting the culture. They're not saying I saw 37 classrooms. It's far, you know, we know the emotional tie-in that education has, but that's the culture that they're looking for.
Yeah, it's important to make it like I do some of the tours, again, not all of them, but it's really important to actually, I talk to the parents, like I say, we are quite intentional about our community feeling and the culture that we have in the school. We're very proud of it. We offer language classes for new parents, and we have regular coffee mornings where I'm at the school gate. I think those things are really important, that welcoming side, and it's just another aspect of the complexity of what culture is or feels. But it's very important, because that will set the tone for how they will be part of your community.
But I think that's a really important point you've just made, Gill, because I can't believe that there's many people watching this who work in schools who don't have people standing on the gates, who don't have parent things. But I think if you are doing it deliberately with that culture in mind, it becomes that much more consistent. And rather than little pockets of activity, you've got a much more holistic, some might say, cultural approach.
So if I was to ask you kind of both a question, kind of as we begin to draw together, like if you were a new school leader or a school, even an experienced school leader who's thinking about culture for the first time, where do you start? Because it's big. Where do you start?
Shall I say? Well, I think you just need to start with the very small details. It's like we say, it's the small things, that they're the small drops that make a wave of change and things, and not oversee those, because it can start small. It can start by being intentional with your staff. What sort of school do you want us to have? What sort of school do we want to be? And start with those conversations, and what sort of behaviours do we want to show? Have meeting norms, and talk about positive intent, and just be intentional about those small things. So when you are, and have moments to gather face to face. We're very quick with online meetings, and we have our morning debriefs every day, and it gives the staff a landing moment. It's face to face contact, little conversations that happen. The day is communicated about. Everybody knows where they're going. So. And you know, they've all got a chance to say something or celebrate something. So you can start with little things like that, and then you're just being more conscious of and being more mindful of culture, because we all know now that it really does matter.
Okay.
I'd echo that. Look, school leaders only have 24 hours in every day, and school leaders need at least 36 hours in every day. My point is, you're never going to achieve this. And there's always a temptation. There's a perfectly good reason why there isn't enough time for this conversation. If I was to stress one thing, this saves you time. And so give yourself that space to have the conversation that Gill's just echoed. What kind of school do we want to put in? Why? What are the values upon which this is based? And then what are the consequential beliefs, behaviours, etc. I frequently, I'm in my 10th year of school leadership, of headship now. And one thing I'll quite often do, because I'm constantly paranoid, is to look back at SLT minutes from previous years. You know, we're in the first week of April. What was I doing 3 years ago, 4 years ago? Have I missed it? I think. And what I noticed looking back in my previous school was that first meeting at the beginning of the year was completely operational. Who sorted the timetable? Oh, the buses, blah, blah, all the stuff that's really important. But we never had that space to go, what are we doing this year? And most importantly, why? For the last 3 years, we've done nothing to do with buses, nothing to do with timetables, because it'll happen. Someone will be on it and you can pick that up later. We start the year and throughout the year discuss, why are we doing this? What are the behaviours? Where have we got this wrong? How can we do it better? So give yourself the space to have those conversations, because if you don't find the space, that space will never emerge, and there will never be a time when you're sitting there going, I've got nothing to talk about this week, let's look at culture. Front load it right from the outset. What kind of school do we want? How? Why? How are we going to put these values into action?
Again, I think that's really great advice for people who are starting to think about it. You know, why do it, and how, you know, what are some of the little things that actually just get you moving with it.
It is worth saying, Helen, just to interrupt you and to come back to a point that was made earlier, there is a really good opportunity to start learning about these conversations coming up at the ECIS conference. And actually, no, I do. That sounds deliberate, and possibly it is, but actually, one of the values of a conference for me is the fact that it takes you away from the constant emails, the constant knocks on the door, can I just have a word, etc., that we all experience all day, every day, and just gives you that mental breathing space to actually reflect on this. And again, you know, come back to your first question. That for me is the real value of this, is that space to have those conversations. And I have no doubt I will come back from that conference far more equipped than I am now to look at this. But yeah, it's that.
No, I totally agree, Simon. I always come back from the ECS conferences with great ideas, and they're usually ones that I think, oh, yes, you know, we've been in this game for a long time, but there's still more great ideas to come. And I think if all those great ideas are based around the idea of culture and leadership, then that's going to be fantastic, because we're not finished. There's so much more, and it, like you say, you're constantly, you know, the culture drum is beating, but we still need to add things to it and improve it all the time. So to get it to the optimum culture we would like, I don't know if we could ever reach that, but wouldn't it be great? So yeah,
agree.
It's definitely the way forward. Okay, so if we bring this session to a close, I think one of the great things we've got to look forward to is the conference, some of those conversations. As always, I always say, you know, although this is the end of this conversation, I hope it's the start of many more conversations and lots more thinking. And I think if the conference does enable that, and, you know, give people some space to listen to others, but also to listen to their own voice as well, then it'll be really, really powerful. But a huge thank you on behalf of ECIS for your contribution today. Simon, for your contribution over the previous videos. And we look forward to working with you both as we move forward in future. I hope that you enjoy the rest of the spring break.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you, Helen. I'm looking forward to seeing you in Düsseldorf in a few weeks' time.